care of a whole bunch of stuff. So to my way of thinking, I'm going to do this real short because it's like you can't just say balanced budget amendment because that does nothing to restrain future taxing or future spending.
Yeah.
It just says it has to be balanced. We know that in Nevada. You have to have supermajority requirements to raise taxes. You have to have spending caps which try to tie spending discipline to objective criteria, population growth, CPI, things like that. I think you should have something. The whole idea of this is to pay the debt down, the deficit down. And so when you talk about that, it's like, you know what? How about something that says if you increase it for a little while, you know this, as you pay it off, it drops down, so you don't have that 14, 16 trillion dollar debt limit out there still. I mean, do some. And by the way, you got to tie it all to a timetable because you hear about, well, $4 trillion. It's like, really? When? Well, maybe 10 years, maybe 20 years. It's like $4 trillion over 20 years, with all due respect, when you start out at 14 trillion, isn't going to do much. I mean, maybe I missed something. So you look at that and it goes back to that credibility stuff again. And so, no disrespect to Senator McConnell, because I heard a couple things, but I will tell you this: Eric Cantor's a bulldog. By the way, he's coming to Las Vegas on August 1st to do a fundraiser for this campaign down there at Sheldon Adelson's place, and had a chance to spend some time with him. Phenomenally down-to-earth guy from Virginia, and sitting here like, Mr. Majority Leader, blah, blah, blah. And I'm not going to say this is a quote. These are my words, so he can't be painted with it. But the discussion went something like this. He says, I spent a lot of time with Harry Reid in the last few days. He is a very interesting fellow. Can't wait till they see that in the video room. So anyhow, I can tell you that those folks on that side, and I don't know where it'll end up, but I think it's pretty important to say this. It's like, first of all, I resent you telling me you're going to downgrade me when you were part of the problem, a big part of the problem in 2008, when you took a ton of what's in that deficit right now to help you, and it didn't trickle down. It didn't trickle down to the hardware store people. It didn't trickle down to the dry goods folks. It didn't trickle down the way it was supposed to. Talk to the AGC guys. You talk about public works. All that shovel-ready stuff was less than 5%. And so I hate to keep coming back to this, but it's like, you know what, you haven't been telling the truth. And it's time that you start telling the truth. And so when you talk about this, like, it's like, so we should just do $2 trillion more in debt and keep going the same direction? It's like there better be something that is 10 years or less, and it is something that is verifiable, so that if I get lucky enough to get elected on September 13th, then when I come back to you again in June, and in the following November, whatever, you can say, so, you've been there for 14 months. How have you done on this stuff? And instead of the stuff where it's like, well, we used up that $2 trillion, and it's at 16 trillion now, but it's like, start telling people the truth. You cannot hide numbers that are $16 trillion upside down. You can't say when I'm borrowing 40 cents out of every dollar we spend that that's responsible public policy. And so it's like, first of all, it doesn't have to be that way. Thank you, financial sector. By the way, thanks Chris Stott and Barney Frank for all that reform. That's another lie. And so now they're sitting there shaking you down to keep staying in debt. And it's like, clearly, you do not have the nation's best fiscal interest at heart. And so there'll be 3 or 4 debates between now and early voting. And I know that the other side's going to say, well, you want it to collapse and whatever. It's like, no, I want you to tell the truth. And we'll work with you when there's something concrete there. But right now, vague promises of 4 trillion, 2 trillion, 10 years, 20 years, any spending caps, any supermajority votes, how much of that's going to go to pay down the deficit? The way you pay down the deficit is to grow the private sector. For every 1 point increase in GDP, you get $750 billion in additional revenue. You want to pay the bills off? Grow the private sector. Quit going into debt that's going to take more and more tax revenue to do this. And quit lying to people about Social Security and Medicare and Obamacare. Because they're all in trouble and they're bad things, and you need people to fix them instead of lying to people hoping that you can pull it off for your next election. Now, that was a little more engaged than I was probably planning on being, but you know what? Somebody will probably hold me accountable for it, and that's appropriate, yes.
I was just wondering if you had, while you was in Washington, if you got a feel of how much support that the cut, cap, and balance position is.
I think there's a lot of support for it, but it needs a couple other aspects, which is show me the calendar. Don't say it generally. It's like, when's it going to happen? And by the way, the one thing that I think all of these ideas need to have is, when are you going to start paying the debt down, and when are you going to finish paying the debt down? Because guess what? Right now we got a $14+ trillion mortgage out there, and so it's like, is it a 15-year mortgage? You know, is it a 30-year mortgage? What is it? Because until you tell me what it is, you're telling me you're not serious about paying it off. So it's kind of like one of those things that a lot of people had out there where it's like, oh, you know, it's don't worry about it, we'll roll it over when it gets time, whatever. It's like, for $14.5 trillion, are you serious? So there's some good ideas out there. I guess that's one of the bad things about having done this on a smaller scale for 14 years, is you've seen a lot of those pitches, and it's like, you know what, they end up in the dirt 3 feet in front of the plate. It's like, you gotta start telling people the truth and going, okay, if we're gonna give you some of that, let's give you small chunks, and here's what we want. Because just continuing to march up, even under the threat of the markets may collapse on August 3rd, even under that threat is like, so your response is, just keep marching it up there. No thanks. Thank you very much.